What's up, Goth Gamer Nation? Today's video is brought to you by Egg.
No, I didn't mean you and me. I meant me and Mark. Just for a little while.
I hope you know what you're doing.
God, I couldn't imagine doing that.
What, having a girlfriend?
No, just making Patricia Arquette mad at me.
Acknowledge my joke!
Ah, shit, that's right.
You taped over this?
Yeah, fuck, it was years ago, but I remember there being something really important and I didn't have a blank tape at the time.
And this is the tape that didn't make the cut.
Yeah.
You have more than one copy of 2004's Van Helsing.
Oh, next you'll ask me to tear pages out of the Bible.
Do you really think that's comparable?
No, you're right. I mean, maybe if it was like a priceless first edition sort of Bible. Maybe if it was signed by Jesus.
I'm just saying I hope it was worth it.
I'm sure it was.
I remain skeptical.
Sometimes I swear I just made you up to give me shit.
Didn't you?
No?
Think about it. You just made a robot dog?
Yeah, for ghost hunting.
You think you're talking to a robot dog right now?
Oh my god. What have I been doing? All these years, I thought. Oh, you fell down.
Yeah, a little help.
Let's go.
Midnight Nowhere, also known as Giorni Oasis or Black Oasis, is a dystopian psychological horror boner comedy point-and-click adventure game developed by Russian studio Saturn Plus and published by Buka Entertainment in the year 2004 for PC. Saturn Plus was formed in 1998 as a small team with mostly experience in 2D animation that would rapidly grow in number and notoriety within the Russian adventure game space in no small part due to a series of games that only within the past 10 years started making their way to my shores called Petka, or Red Comrades. This type of silly Soviet cartoon game was their bread and butter, but they eventually began to dabble in 3D animation. From what I can tell, thanks mostly to an extensive interview with director Alexei Nikonov and project manager Nikolai Khudensov, Midnight Nowhere was an unquestionably morbid and adult outlier in their output, especially when placed next to their previous game, 2001's Jazz and Faust, a comparatively colorful and whimsical game about two characters searching for treasure in various ancient cities. Saturn Plus's turnaround with games was pretty quick. This one took about 6 or 7 months to complete according to Nikonov, and was expected to bring them a decent paycheck, as it would be sold overseas outside of electronic shops in grocery store checkout lanes and American big box chains, alongside the likes of Mystery Case Files and Room Temperature Meats. Unfortunately, due to some brief but mature content within, it was booted from this opportunity and many copies were simply shipped back. Though Nikonov is billed as Midnight Nowhere's director, well, Black Oasis's director, I don't think the name Midnight Nowhere even exists in Russia. According to him, he had almost nothing to do with its development. It was based on a script that was mailed to the office by a programmer named Mikhail Saldimyshev, who had been trying to get eyes on this story for a while, having 2 years prior submitted it to a contest held in the Russian gaming magazine Game.exe, though it was rejected. He had also already taken the liberty of turning it into a text-based game of his own. The Saturn Plus team were so enamored by the idea of the game that they would meet after work and plan elements of it, and since it was already formatted as an adventure game, it was mostly a matter of supplying visuals to it. Animation designer Andrei Evdokimov made some test animations based on this story, and soon everyone in the office wanted to work on the project, something Nikonov likened to an infection. Saying Saldemyshev simply wrote the story is a bit of an understatement. He planned out every puzzle, every line of dialogue, including the descriptive ones when you examine something. The devs would routinely ask him for revisions, when there were sequences they simply couldn't afford to bring to life, or when something as vital as a whole puzzle needed to be replaced to make the game consistently fun. What was ultimately adapted was a very different story, with most of its explainers and exposition all but completely scrubbed, leaving the game as a curious exercise in horror atmosphere with what feels like tons of dialogue, and yet its plot is constantly evading your direct gaze, like a squiggly shape drifting in your retina. What little coverage there was about the game in the US seemed to severely misunderstand what kind of game Saturn had cooked up. GameSpot in particular noted its release in Russia, but referred to it as a survival horror game, and 2 years later, when it was on its way to the States, took a step forwards and then backwards from the truth, calling it an adventure game, though one where you battle creatures of the dark. Then a few months later, when a demo was released of the game, referred to the player character as an insomniac. Just kind of odd that of the 3 times a noteworthy website would ever mention this game, it got something different incorrect each time. Midnight Nowhere was greeted with average to negative reviews from critics that skewed positive the more niche the source, and the closer the source was to Russia. A review that was amusingly written by Agustin Cortes, the creator of Scratches, one of my favorite adventure games, and recently, finally, Asylum, which was written for Just Adventure in 2003, stands as one of the more generous write-ups the game received, heaping praise onto its creepy atmosphere, intriguing premise, and cool lead character. Concluding with, Midnight Nowhere was an immensely satisfying adventure. I was pleasantly surprised with the outcome, which was a very unconventional ending. This one will leave you with your jaw dropped and mentally revising the interwoven parts of the story for a while. Something about the setting, or maybe the despairing soundtrack, especially the main tune, reminded me of a David Cronenberg movie. Conversely, its coverage in the May issue of PC Gamer was much less forgiving, bemoaning the game's tedious gameplay, unintuitive UI, juvenile sense of humor, and relentless adult content, rating the game 13%, and writing, "It's been a long time since a game has actually managed to insult both my intelligence and my sense of decency. But Midnight Nowhere pulled it off. It's quite simply a foul-mouthed, stinking piece of adolescent crap." Despite reactions like this, in a 2025 interview, Saldemyshev found the very idea that his story received any reviews as a complete success, and thus didn't take the mostly foreign criticisms to heart. In the years following the game's release, he attempted to reach out to Saturn Plus and Buka several times for ideas that included a direct sequel to Midnight Nowhere as an action game. But this was apparently turned down due to its unavoidable similarity to Rockstar North's Manhunt, as its protagonist would be followed and tracked via a network of CCTV cameras. Curiously, in 2008, Buka would publish a game titled Chornaya Metka, in which the player character participates in a televised game of death as camera drones follow you around, a concept briefly mentioned in Midnight Nowhere. That game was developed by a studio named Orion Games, which was comprised of Saturn Plus expats. Perhaps this led to some sore feelings, and eventually this relationship fizzled out, and Saturn Plus would be liquidated as a legal entity in the year 2016. Saldemyshev would find it untenable to continue working in games, and fell back on his career as a programmer, but still found the time to begin remaking Black Oasis as a visual novel on his own, returning elements from his story that Saturn Plus removed, such as mutant crocodiles, and removing the vagueness that pervades the 2003 version, making it available on a platform called VK Play. It was cobbled together seemingly out of stock photos, stolen assets, and AI-generated images, this close to ending his stint in the gaming business on a sympathetic note. Much like a game I made content out of recently, Next Life, Midnight Nowhere was another Big Lots bargain bin acquisition that defined a certain era of my relationship with games. One of several strange tomes that I found marked down into oblivion, into obscurity, driving me to say something I've said less and less since then. What the fuck is this? It looks like a game. It's got a box, it's got the disc, I guess this is legit, but I suppose it could be a really avant-garde parental control software. There's something otherworldly about it as well. Like, I'm not supposed to have it, and its rightful owner is breathing down my neck. So, it was also on the short list of games I wanted to make videos about when I started my channel, and never did, only because in the 21 years in between playing it and now, I was unable to get it running again, which only distanced me from its reality further. I began doubting if I had ever played it, for all the grief I'm going through trying to play it now. Every couple years, I would pop the disc back in and look around for fan patches or workarounds, sitting on the PC gaming wiki hitting F5 like Mark Hamburger. Until this year, when I worked up the nerve to download unmarked folders from Russian forum posts. Finally now, after years of my memory, my desire to revisit it, becoming numbed, becoming blurry, losing sight of the purpose of my mission, it just kinda worked, and I don't really know why. But I want to justify. You know where the rest of that goes. Ripping someone's head off! Luckily, that hasn't come back to bite me in the ass.
Scanning area. Target acquired.
Since the dawn of time, man, once they got there, has had a contentious relationship with the elements. We struggle to break and make subservient forces that govern all things. Do we truly create flame, or merely beg for its light and its warmth? We take in water, sure, but does it not also leave of its own accord? You lie in bed at the witching hour, feeling the urge, trying to convince yourself that it's merely a dream, a nightmare, perhaps, but it is neither. It is the Piss Man, cashing in his amber ticket home on a PVC tubeway, and of course he's brought his boys along with him. A story that is always true no matter when or where it's spoken concerns our hubristic ignorance to Gaia's plan. One such tale brings us to the precise time span of the 1930s at some point, in the shadow of Alberta's Mount. I don't know how to pronounce. A photographer so taken by the national park's beauty drives out onto the frozen surface of Lake Minnewanka. He exits the vehicle and prepares a tripod, affixes a camera to it, and points its lens at the majestic mountain range, just missing the arguably comparable beauty of his 1928 Hudson Essex saloon quietly being swallowed by the lake, turning around just in time to see its grill disappear into a watery maw. Section 14 of the Canadian National Parks General Regulation states that no person shall willfully remove, deface, damage, or destroy any prehistoric or historic artifacts or structures in a park. A team of scuba divers would be reminded of this section when they became the first to set eyes on the Hudson in 85 years. So fused to the lake bed that it is one with it. Its removal punishable by not only God's law, but Canadian law, utilizing inhumane methods that haven't made it to the States yet. They make you watch corner gas. The parable of the stranded motorist has done nothing to stem the tide of vehicles entering bodies of water when they ought not to. It's almost like they just do that. Something in their programming, a human touch that desires, just as we do, to walk hand in hand into extinction. Over 1,700 miles away, or 2,700 in the unit of measurement we're simply in too deep to switch to now, you'll find the state of Texas's Grapevine Lake. While this lake no doubt already has a vehicle or two beneath its surface, there's a visibility issue making them hard to spot without the use of sonar scanning. But such devices are outlawed and deemed dark-sided in these regions. This lake is not populated by loons or trout, but it is home to forever chemicals and temporarily missing persons. It was in this lake that a man with a very funny name slowly ambled in equally funny car into the lake, under the notion that it was capable of aquatic travel.
They're calling him the stupid asshole.
Yeah, so he's looking at charges of being a stupid asshole.
As the man was led away in cuffs, charged with some maritime violation that more bureaucratically describes believing a vessel made in the image of a child's doodle holds sway over water, forces assemble to dredge the wretched thing from the lake, ignorant to the futility of doing so. It's not a lake, it's an oh shit, that's a lot of water. It is a singular being that will rise and vacuum seal the car door of humanity someday. It's not bound by lines on a map, it's in your pipes, it's in your walls, gurgling like an unfed beast. Similarly, Black Lake serves as the setting for Midnight Nowhere, which is set in the distant future of 2019 in the fictional, I'm assuming, Russian city of Chernozersk, which is rapidly spiraling into chaos under bizarre circumstances. The opening cutscene is a narration of several documents being sent between the Black Lake Police Department to the Black Lake prosecutor. Several homeless people have been found brutally murdered. Initially, this was waved off as an act of gang violence, but days later, more bodies, more disfigured. Few days after that, even more bodies in various locations around town. It's around then that the idea of a serial killer enters conversation. Within the following week, 11 more bodies show up. A task force called the FFS is organized. Panic starts to set in. Next month, the body count is approaching 100. People are leaving town. The police and their serial killer task force have come up with absolutely nothing. No leads, no clues, no idea who is just cutting their way through the town's population. Another week passes and the military seals off Chernozersk and treats the situation like an outbreak, cordoning off the remaining population into quarantine zones, and still, bodies are routinely found. It is against this backdrop that our protagonist opens his eyes in the dimly lit refrigerated basement of a morgue and claws his way out of a sealed body bag, with no memory of how he came to be there, how he still lives, or even what his name is. Now, I'm gonna freeze my description of the premise right here because your opinion of this game and its world and the dystopic, nihilistic atmosphere it's trying to cultivate will be irreparably changed the moment this guy opens his mouth. So, before that happens, everything about Midnight Nowhere is framed as deeply psychological and adult, even touching on social issues and our personal relationship or feelings about things like violence, crime, and war. The tone is evident all over, even the game's packaging, offering you a tagline reading, "What would you do if you woke up gasping for air only to find your mouth filled with the plastic of a body bag?" Another quote inside the flap on the front cover, which is attributed to Anonymous, reads, "The paths in hell lead nowhere, and the rooms they lead to are the color of blood at midnight under a full moon." So the paths lead nowhere, but where that leads to? It's a dark room. This comedically dark language is what one would expect from other surreal and literary point-and-click adventure games like Sanitarium or Darkseid 2 or I Have No Mouth and I Must Scream. And to a degree, Midnight Nowhere exists in a world just like those games, one that almost lives on the border between waking and dreaming, where logic loses focus and you can't help but think this whole experience is a nightmare that you will mercifully wake up from at some point, even if it is to a heart rate monitor's flatline or a new circle of hell to explore. Intentional or not, I remember going through this whole game, and even as its final cutscene played, I still couldn't really decide if I had taken part in something that literally happened or if I was simply wandering a psychological fabrication. There is something there creatively that I love. It's a feeling that many similar games have given me, and I think I recognized that when I first saw the box on the bottom of a shelf in the back of an overstock thrift store. I had never been more confident that I was about to play a game that presents a slightly contrived mystery and then pulls a bizarre twist that I'll probably nod my head at and say, fair enough, weird enough. And yet, all of that is undermined by this fucking guy, this cartoon sleazebag that is incapable of coherently commenting on anything, and instead speaks through an incomprehensible Andrew Dice Clay stand-up routine ran through machine translation and back a few times. Guy can't remember his own name, but he can remember his Type 5 like that.
2 shots and you can do artificial respiration on some babe. Alive. Only alive. Could I take it and use it somewhere a little cozier? You know, it makes it hard getting it with your hands. That's not likely to be an issue for me. These sluts don't sniff around too hard. Ah, great tits. Needed some silicone though.
Our protagonist, who I'll refer to as Larry,
Я вам не Ларри. Да даже если б я и был Ларри, Анка никогда на такое не согласится.
Stumbles out of his body bag and begins piecing together where he is. Much of this first third of the game's story plays out over documents and emails that Larry picks up while traversing an empty hospital. Well, empty aside from all the dead people, of course. He's in a morgue that's in complete disarray that was once overseen by a pathologist named M.A. Katzman. Interoffice memos discuss a body named S.S. Belov, a mystery corpse that the FSS intervened to forbid Katzman from performing an autopsy on. He discusses the possibility of going ahead with it anyways, along with the chief doctor, Yuri Stepanovich. Not long after that, people around the office started dying. The FSS has lingered around but provided no insight or help, and Katzman makes a futile attempt to contact authorities. Past the wall. After fiddling around with a fuse box, Larry enters a waiting room of sorts, similarly messy. Someone's even tagged Katzman's a deadbeat on the walls. Though it is cut off, and if you combine it with the next screen over, it appears to say, in Jar Jar lingo, Katzmanza was a deadbeat, so that could just be a translation error, but Misa just making an observation. The floor above is no different. Fluorescent bulbs flicker, strobe lighting various blood trails and signs of struggle. This hallway is decorated by bizarre, satire-laden advertisements for the goods and services of a future that never shook the vices of the mid-aughts, and instead invented workarounds and medications for them. Violent urges can be quelled with VR programs intentionally designed to fulfill the user's darkest urges. Alcoholism can be overcome with a patch, and meals have been condensed into gel capsules. These all use graphics and language that seem intentionally over the top, designed by a high schooler on a watch list, and in an almost accusatory way. As if paired with the state of the hospital, one would think it only makes sense that this is the world we get. This Stepanovich character we've been hearing about in notes happens to still be in his office, though dead and slumped over his desk. In front of him, a mundane complaint written by Katzman concerning the very fuse box that served as a roadblock 10 minutes ago. An answering machine message which sounds startlingly like the voice of Larry, simply lowered in pitch, only fueling speculation that we live inside a dream.
He keeps talking about some monster. Should we call the police anyway?
End of message.
This voice implies that Katzman has gone crazy, barricading himself somewhere in the hospital and firing a gun at what he perceived to be monsters. There are a lot of locked doors in this area of the hospital, many locked unconventionally or sabotaged for the sake of puzzle gameplay. But obviously this conflicts a little bit with the story they've presented, in which this place was suddenly evacuated in the midst of a citywide panic. And I think there are a couple lines from Larry, not so much lampshading this so much as sharing in your confusion, which I think you'd agree doesn't fix this mistake so much as shrug and say, huh, weird.
When did they have the time to lock everything up? Where are the suspects supposed to shit?
The exit from this area is missing a component of its keypad, and over a CCTV recording, we witness a nurse calmly inputting the code to the door, and then, sometime later, a mysterious man removes part of the electronic lock before noticing the camera and giving it a look that says, "Now, this is just between me and you, blinking red light." Since you've probably been seeing acts of censorship by now, I guess it's as good a time as any to note the game's uncharacteristically cavalier attitude about nudity and sex, which seemed to ruffle the feathers of a few critics of the era, and I'll admit was simply not commonplace in the point-and-click adventure game world, a genre that has historically been pretty tame and lighthearted. Even games like Leisure Suit Larry, which this game references at one point, were just a little raunchy. This game has the odd tendency to incorporate nudity beyond the limits of where you'd typically find it in the wild, such as a cramped arcade room or behind a shed. No, this game appears to just pull real photos from somewhere. I can't imagine they held a photo shoot or anything, and then just kind of pasted them on various things, so there is a pretty consistent sleaze to the game that is so abundant that I would on and off wonder if it was saying something with it, showing us modification and commodification of sex run amok as a result of late-stage capitalism, being set 15 years in the future from when the game was made. But as of now, I think that is a naive thought, and that the developers were probably just horny and didn't imagine a future where someone would make content about their game that could potentially be age restricted. If you could cross your fingers for me.
Push the button. It buzzes. Oh, enough already. That's all I need. Someone to catch me here over this.
So on this nurse, we can find a key to her locker and a condom, which Larry can pick up and that I immediately filled with water because really, what else were we going to do with it? If this factored into a puzzle in any other way, I would be shocked. I would say this is Larry Laffer behavior, but in retrospect, I think he really only used condoms for their intended purpose, which I never really learned because the screen would always cut to black. After throwing the makeshift water balloon at an electrical panel to stop a spinning perilous fan in a maintenance room of some sort, we find the body of Katzman, who's gone out on his own terms, eaten a sandwich of his own making, which Larry comments on with the same level of respect and tact that he's shown every other dead body.
Guess the poor guy put the gun in his own mouth and played Russian roulette. Surprise sector. The pupils don't react to light. Maybe because his brain is on the wall? He doesn't look anything like that guy who ventilated his own head.
It's one of a handful of, I don't know, I guess bits that are in such awful taste that they shamefully made me snort laugh because they're not funny. It's kind of an anti-comedy thing, which might actually make this game smart. The name SS Belov comes up once again when Larry accesses a computer terminal full of morgue records, revealing their full name to be Sergei Sergeyevich Belov. They knew nothing about his history, but he was admitted in a coma and later died. This is not intimated to you successfully at all, at least in the English version, but the assumption is, of the bodies in the morgue, Belov is the one that didn't have an autopsy performed on them. In fact, some bureaucratic force prevented that from happening, and since Larry also hasn't had an autopsy performed on him, then one might assume he is Belov. Judging by the personal effects, he wonders if he was a journalist of some sort. In this pile of newspaper clippings, we read about the military cordon around Black Lake lifting, replaced by a massive concrete fence stretching around its entire perimeter. A Running Man-style game show that runs out of Black Lake called Black Oasis, in which contestants are fitted with body cams and sent into the walled-off town, and should they survive 3 full days, they will be rewarded $100,000. So far, only one person has managed to do this. Another says that murders have slowed down as they've started the process of screening refugees through quarantine centers to decide if they are fit for evacuation. The final article asks if Black Lake will ever return to normal, and if the killer, the Black Lake executioner, will ever be identified. After hours spent navigating this insane network of keys and locked rooms, we eventually walk out of the hospital, only to be immediately surrounded by FBI agents in trainers, one of which appears to be a child, which elicits no questions. The things I like about Midnight Nowhere tend to be things that I'm not even entirely sure were conscious decisions, or if it's just that a joke kind of landed with me and thus confused me. I actually love that as this act of the game ends and our inventory is wiped, the FBI agents scrutinize what you collected and comment on it, as your pockets are full of all the illogical things you could be holding onto in an old school adventure game, like a high-powered microscope that we used once to break a glass fire axe case. The idea of picking it up and keeping it was so second nature that I got a good laugh out of someone also acknowledging that I still had it and accusing me of stealing it. I found it very frustrating yet amusing in this subversion of not really expectation, more like a subversion of want kind of way, that you spend the first couple hours playing this game stuck in a stifling hospital that for whatever reason I was really impatient to leave. There's something so relentless about the pace of exploring it and unlocking sections, only to be met with another roadblock. It's like it never picks up momentum. So by the time we get outside, there was a pretty genuine feeling of relief, like I was trapped in a cage, unable to breathe, and finally, nobody asked for this, but I could have began the video with that sentiment. If I were to try to get the comedy of Midnight Nowhere working, I think I would have turned the dial way down on our lead if we could just get him working. But he's got to be straighter, more deadpan, and have absurd situations to react to, not just, walking around a building full of corpses, pointing at each one and saying, for everyone at home keeping score, that's the 5th dead body I would have if they were still kicking. Don't tell my therapist I said that.
Hey, this is some kind of necro striptease.
No, I'd get him out on a small-scale road trip through Black Lake, where he's looking for a MacGuffin. Maybe he lost his car, as well as his memory somehow, and it throws him into numerous bits involving a cult and aliens, and this is Dude, Where's My Car, so never mind. If you would like to experience the rest of this game's story on your own, feel free to skip to this time, where I will summarize my feelings in a roundabout way, a tradition I'm upholding purely for the ritual of my video review format, as I would honestly be genuinely surprised if you used the spoiler break for its intended purpose. What, were you gonna get around to Midnight Nowhere? Was this in your backlog? Are you waiting for a good sale on Midnight Nowhere? Waiting to pick up the Game of the Year edition? Waiting?
Yes, I am former Soviet Army intelligence officer for several years, and I was the one who suggested that all our MiG configuration aircraft be replaced by giant tubes. My colleagues in the Kremlin were not convinced of this plan, but I say, no, trust me, whatever size of tube you're picturing, double it. I wanted them to be like so big that you cannot even imagine. And even then, it is not as big as what I am having in mind. Now, the US caught wind of this project pretty fast, because, well, the thing was just so big. I mean, you can see that fucker from orbit.
Unable to explain why he exited a hospital armed to the teeth, leaving every patient and member of staff dead, Belov, maybe, is thrown in the back of a wagon and dumped into a cell with 3 other prisoners. In either a purely economic decision or a whimsical creative one, I have my answer. Perhaps you'll have your own. This small prison cell is one of the longest sequences in the game, to the point of being the second act all its own. Sharing the space with you is Hog and Grinja. When the protagonist is asked for his handle, he guesses it's Sergei, since that's what it appeared to be on paper. After being instructed to pick a cot, only to find that Hog has claimed all of them, Belov displays an ability to fight and a comedic overconfidence that extends beyond his inner monologue. Turns out he kind of just is the guy he's sounded like this whole time. After completely destroying Hog, their de facto leader, Whip, is woken up, initiating the longest conversation in a video game. And don't worry, it's not all an exposition dump, it's just kind of, it's just talking. Not quite catching your name, he decides to call you Gray, and claims that he knows all the crooks in this town and he's never seen you, but due to the state of emergency, even a minor infraction like not having an ID or stealing a high-powered microscope is automatic time. Whip, on the other hand, is looking at a harsher punishment: deep freeze. The government has turned to science in their desperation to stop the executioner, taking anyone found guilty of a crime that involved a death and freezing them. Belov then asks a question so rudimentary and obvious that I can only assume it was a translation error.
What's an ID? It's a card with your face, name, and some other stuff.
Whip's heard that they don't have a clear long-term goal for freezing criminals, and the only time they've tried to thaw one of them, they came back kind of fucked up. None of these guys have tried leaving Oasis, mostly out of the rumor that nobody actually gets out. Sure, they have that whole quarantine system, but everyone that goes there disappears, regardless, and can't contact you from the other side. They theorize that the government is so scared of the executioner that they'd rather just shoot anything that tries to leave town than attempt to determine who it actually is. Again, not having a real beat on where this game is coming from and what it's trying to say, there are story elements that feel sort of like misdirects or red herrings, but I honestly have no clue if that's actually what they are or if they forgot to follow up on some things or changed their mind at some point. It's possible there was at one point monsters, like that GameSpot article suggested. But now it's like if you set a movie in the Puppet Master universe, but not only did you never show the puppets, the characters never learn about there being supernaturally animated puppets. He's just seeing the aftermath and rightfully not guessing it was the work of puppets. The opening cutscene talks about unrelated murders, but shows the bodies we stumbled on. Because our character doesn't remember who he is in the midst of a panic about a serial killer, and because we woke up in a freezer and then later have someone tell us that the only guy that woke up from a freezing had melted brain, it really feels like they are setting up for the reveal that we are the killer. It would be cliché, it would be predictable, but it also feels like it's the only twist you got right now. In fact, even though I hadn't played this game in 21 years, I remembered it being something like that. I remember only that there was a twist and I was not impressed by it. Not wanting to be transferred to a big boy prison, Belov offers to help the three of them break out of the jail, which is not heavily fortified and looks like it's made out of moldy drywall. But really, the only play they have is getting a cop to walk in and then take them hostage. Morbidly, they all agree that at least one of them will probably die in the process, creating a distraction that will allow the others to get the upper hand. Whip devises an overly complicated method of drawing straws that involves collecting a series of nude playing cards hidden in the most unintuitive places I can think of, and answering pop culture riddles scribbled on each of them. After what amounted to an hour of proving myself to Whip and going over each of our tactical placements in this complicated maneuver, the cop on the other side of the door decides to skip walking into the cell and opts to just pump gas into the room, knocking everyone out. When Belov comes to, he's in a classic interrogation room, complete with lamp pointed at suspect's face and medieval torture chair. The questioning starts from the assumption that you killed everyone in the hospital. based on your prints being all over an axe, a gun, a scalpel, countless doorknobs, a vibrator, it looks bad for sure, but they still have no idea who this guy is. You're given a number of possible explanations, and all of them are met with incredulity. Even the truth. There's simply nothing you can say that won't be run through a criminal psychology shredder. In an interrogation, if a suspect retains the same blank expression and bears no visible signs of thought or emotions, it's usually a sign that they are being deceptive. Conversely, if they seem relaxed or exhibit neutral posture, this could also be seen as a sign of deception. Furthermore, wearing a black shirt to the interrogation can suggest a black void in the part of the suspect's mind that processes truthful statements. Moreover, crime experts largely agree that if I superimpose a red arrow pointed at a person's face and write "realizes" on the thumbnail, that all my baseless armchair analysis will be given the illusion of legitimacy, obscuring the exploitative dystopian detritus it truly is. Sensing the futility here, you can also just claim to be the Black Lake executioner, which they would almost believe had the executioner not struck again while Belov was in custody. Which is said really dismissively in the midst of a comedy bit, but this really gave me pause because the possibility that we have been the killer this whole time was really all I had to hold on to. That was the only part of this story that I was pretty sure about. If I'm not part of what appears to be the central mystery of Midnight Nowhere, then truly, what is my purpose? The interrogator sends you off to a punishment cell where you will wait before heading off to deep freeze. Almost immediately after entering, however, the lights cut out and several screams and gunshots can be heard. By the time the lights come back on, the guard that walked us to the cell is missing an arm. Through a series of predictably insane steps, somehow, Belov gets a hold of the guard's gun and shoots his way out of the punishment cell. Going back to the holding cell reveals that Hogg and Grynia are dead as well, both in ways that seem absurd for a human to pull off. Sort of mirroring the hospital segment where we pick through a bunch of dead bodies to learn about the interoffice drama and the quirks of these corpses, the same sort of thing plays out with the cops. We read their memos and emails, learn about silly things like one of them taking a meal replacement medication but not understanding that they aren't supposed to take it with food. Returning to the interrogation room, we can pore over the records of our former cellmates, learn about Whip and his history of escaping custody. Grynia attempted to cheat at a poker game and then roughed up a security guard, shouting sexually demeaning insults at them. And Hogg tried to rip off a local business, but inadvertently knocked himself out as the cops arrived. And finally, Belov. They never had time to ID him, but logged that you likely killed 11 people and stole a very nice microscope. Curious to find out just who this Belov person you appear to be is, we go through the process of collecting prints and send them out to be scanned in the police database. They get back to us with an email explaining that they are unable to identify us even with prints and photos because the FSS has blocked inquiries, leading to them guessing we are some kind of big cheese. They do, however, provide a link to a secret internet hub for FSS agents, and with access to their database, the prints bring back a profile for a guy named Special Agent Artem Mikhailovich Gorin. So this might be our real identity if it didn't also say that this guy died a few months ago while carrying out an assignment. I don't know exactly what the limits are of an FFS agent's reach and power, but they kind of operate like a secret police that can do any number of clandestine spy shit from the safety of a computer terminal. After accessing our profile, we can then activate a cell phone that was left with one of the more comfortable prisoners and was exclusively in service via a phone sex subscription service that was actually an FFS surveillance trap, I think. I'm like 70% sure that's what I just fucking read. There is a language barrier, but it's quite clear that Midnight Nowhere is presenting a nakedly corrupt and inept police force that is desperate to solve its image problems by simply strong-arming journalists into writing positive press, but their inability to catch a single serial killer has led to a cordoned-off hermit city. It's hard to say what is more insane, the fact that one guy could John Wick half of a city and still evade capture, or that an entire police force with the aid of a government agency and the military, are incapable of stopping that one guy. A Bible quote I was too preoccupied with thoughts of the music video for Hadaway's What Is Love to remember says that what has been will be again. What has been done will be done again. While playing this game, I was getting these visions. I had seen this before. Maybe. Kind of. Not really. And maybe I'm just describing the obnoxious part of my brain that attempts to relay anything back to another piece of media. I don't really know where this story comes from, but the film that continued to crawl into my thinking was Night Watch. Not to be confused with the Russian film Nochnoi Dozor, Night Space Watch, shown here without a space, which is a fun movie in its own right for different reasons. A particular stim of mine being this sentence.
I just ran out of this shit.
And not to be confused with the Danish 1994 version by the same director, which is technically the same movie. So I guess it's kind of like that one, sure. But 1997's Night Watch, like Midnight Nowhere, is a thriller of sorts with comedic elements and deals with characters that have become disassociated or detached from life's routine and are sort of playing footsie with being a sociopath. It also concerns a series of murders targeting those who wouldn't ensure meaningful investigation by the police, homeless in the latter and sex workers in the former, and both open with a vague police statement ensuring that they aren't dealing with a gang of killers, just one. And they also can't say why they know that, while addressing criticisms that the police are simply uninterested in stopping the killer. Throughout the film, Ewan McGregor's character, Martin, a law student that takes a security job at a morgue, is put in increasingly suspicious circumstances that tie him to the murders. At a certain point, he himself can't really explain how certain things are even happening, if he's imagining acts of violence or blacking out while participating in real ones. It sure looks like he's the guy doing this. We follow him struggling to prove his innocence to the detectives working the case and perhaps even himself, culminating in a revelation found in the morgue's records. One that hints at a series of institutional, systemic fuck-ups that allowed this to happen. And I feel like it wouldn't be that big a stretch to suggest that the same type of thing is happening here. A chain of incompetence has allowed a whole lot of death, and in Midnight Nowhere's case, led to a heavily monitored police state, a police town if you will, perpetuating a system that does nothing to stop crime beyond killing humans and replacing them with cops. And this is kind of off topic, but in getting clips from this movie, I was forced to reckon with just how gamer-fried my brain has become. I can't help but see non-games gamified. So I see a movie like this and I think it's just like Five Nights at Freddy's or Mortuary Assistant. There's a security guy sitting at a desk in a creepy old building. He has all these rules bordering on rituals that he has to strictly follow just in case one of the dead bodies gets up, but that would never happen. Remember to hold X to not look at the bodies lest your sanity meter drop. Oh no, you forgot the lights, you piece of shit! Eventually, we catch up to Whip, suffering from a gunshot wound and rapidly bleeding out, initiating what has to be one of my favorite bits of item-based puzzle work in an adventure game, and the fact that it's in this game of all games is confounding yet on brand. Whip is unconscious and needs to be roused from sleep in order to talk to us, so we can grab some liquid ammonia from the dead guard's medical kit. He wakes up enough to tell you that the Black Island Executioner, which I can only guess is a typo. I mean, I thought we already knew the Black Isle Executioner was Interplay. Whip says the guy mortally wounded him, but more interestingly, he called you the Belov Imposter, confusing this guy that thought he might have been Belov. Whip knew the real Belov, and this guy ain't acting like that guy. We ask about the new name, Goran, which means nothing to Whip. He's unable to answer any more questions about Belov because he's in too much pain and needs some downers, so we go back to the medical kit and get a sedative for him. Afterwards, he's lucid enough to ask for weed, which we can fish off the dead body of a sex worker in another holding cell. Though that's not the terminology Goran uses.
Judging from the outfit, she's a colleague of the first slut. I can't see any blood, but she's dead too. I got all the luck. Here, chick, 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 chick. Stop saying shit like that. It's unprofessional.
Another body has a lighter, and we can give both to Whip. Unfortunately, there is still a haziness to his thoughts, and he now requires some high-quality coke to really sharpen his focus. A telephone in the lobby starts ringing, and answering it reveals that the building is surrounded by cops. And the only reason they haven't stormed the place is that they have assumed there is a hostage situation going on inside, and they are awaiting the perpetrator's list of demands. Like every interaction you have with a cop, everything you say is registered as a joke. So saying hostages, everyone's dead already, just results in, oh haha, that's actually really funny, but seriously, do you want like a cool car or...
Why don't you go fuck yourself?
Don't put down the receiver, talk to me.
Which is fair given how rarely this guy says anything of substance or use. Speaking of the use of substances, we find a sort of evidence, well, it's not really like a lockup, it's more like a drug room, and bring back some coke for Whip. With the right combination of drugs inside him, he tells you that Belov dug up a lot about the executioner and was eventually put into deep freeze. But he thinks there may be a secret facility in the building where deep freeze prisoners can be thawed using special cartridges, and he and his buddies on the outside were actually trying to free the real Belov. He gives you a phone number for one of them, a guy named Stupor, before dying. Calling the number on a, what he calls, a Motorola, but it's clearly a Nokia, triggers a really funny back and forth of overly noir criminal scumbag dialogue written by extraterrestrials.
My name's Goran. Does that say anything to you?
No.
Me neither.
It seems Whip was working for this guy, and they had planned to find the thawing cartridge for the real Belov, and then take the station hostage before Stupor could bail him out somehow. But they did not anticipate the executioner showing up and just killing everyone instead. Since Stupor wants Belov's cartridge, he agrees to help Goran escape the building once he's got it. Disguised as a bathroom door, there is indeed a secret entrance to an iceberg office, the group that seems to administer the deep freeze technology. Earlier, we found a dead body with an iceberg lapel pin and some matching stationery. Actually, I think what makes a lot of this game's vagueness and strangeness intriguing is that there is clearly an order and a purpose for it all. I mean, the story is coming from a source greater than it, and you can sense that. You can sense that even though you don't know why a thing is happening, it exists in a world where it probably makes sense, and I guess it's up to you if you are comforted by that. The game is saying trust me, but you have no reason to trust it. With cartridge in hand, we call back Stupor, and he tells us that he has a man on the inside, guarding an underground tunnel that leads out of the prison. Stupor suggests you let him fuck you to earn passage to safety, or just convince him to, I don't know. I defer to your judgment there.
Give him some ass or talk him into opening the hatch some other way.
Either way, he's going to be waiting at the end of the tunnel. Sure enough, there is a little old guy in one of the cells who answers after we knock in a specific sequence. The last barrier to completing this game is that the old man wants you to finish his crossword puzzle. And I can't promise you this was their intention, but I felt convinced that they really wanted you to look at this revolutionary-styled newspaper called Black Lake Pravda and take this as the last word on the executioner and the police and the sort of conclusion of where we leave this world. And it's that, after 4 years, law enforcement agencies have done nothing to save lives, and if anything, have replaced the citizenry with a population of security services and police forces that just sort of milk money from the state, enriching themselves while fussing over their weight, obsessing about pop stars, micromanaging their coworkers instead of just stopping the one guy that simply keeps getting away with it, almost like they don't want it to stop. Goran or Belov or Larry then walks through the tunnel, emerging through a manhole to the light of day. A van idles nearby, but when he tries to enter it, he's kicked in the head, triggering a series of flashbacks. We see our man pleading with Yuri Stepanovich, the chief doctor at the hospital, to sign his death certificate. The executioner has just entered the building and a swarm of feds will soon follow, and he thinks the perfect way to wait out the violence would be in a body bag inside a locked freezer. A doctor looks over him, the sound of metal tools falling. What appears to be Whip pleads for his life, claiming he never ratted out Belov, suffering the same wound we saw him die from. Goran comes to on the floor of the deep freeze facility as a couple of mobsters release Belov, who happens to look exactly like you. He calls Goran a pathetic excuse for a clone that screwed things up in this town, but also thanks him for a mission well done and calls him a man who never was, as Goran takes Belov's place in the deep freeze. I'm not sure if anyone beyond Mikhail Saldimyashev knows exactly what's happening in this game's final cutscene. I found no clear explanation for what is happening in this ending, or why it's happening, or why they made this the ending, and without examining it all that much further, I can appreciate that it's fittingly bleak and nihilistic. At the very least, I am tasting that. All at once, I relive that nameless emotion I felt 21 years ago, feeling like something is happening. You're saying something to me and it seems like it's something important, but atmospheric noise keeps interrupting you. I catch a word or two of it, but then a motorcycle speeds by, a flock of birds is disturbed from a nearby tree, and I can only grimace in response and say, I'm sorry, one more time? Out of obsessive curiosity, I even resorted to sifting through the comment sections of Russian long plays of the game and praying for any discussion of the ending. Some of these comments seem to be worded pretty authoritatively in the negative, like, this ending sucked because it was just X, and that X was something I didn't get from it. Like, it sucked because they revealed you are playing as the executioner the whole time, but it doesn't make any sense because a bunch of killings happened while you were knocked out or behind bars. Are we the executioner by technicality? Because Belov is the executioner and we are made in his likeness? It may not be a very good ending, but to criticize it for an interpretation you dreamt up seems a little strange. I'm an ardent defender of the show Lost, so I'm pretty accustomed to someone angrily explaining some shit they made up to me. My read of it, which obviously comes with a slight disadvantage and frankly embarrassment of being American, and thus I'm positive the original language version of this game surely has to make at least 5% more sense. It just has to. My read of it is that a powerful mobster of sorts named Belov cloned himself and inserted his clone named Goran into the FSS in order to keep tabs on what they knew about him and his organization, to be one step ahead of them at all times, but not long after that he was picked up by the authorities, charged with murder, and promptly frozen. Whip says Belov uncovered a lot about the executioner. Maybe he found out he was a cop, or several cops, or all of the cops, forcing him to go underground and resort to sci-fi schemes in order to fake his own freezing. A month or so later, Goran asks the chief doctor to allow him to be dead on paper, both to evade the executioner, but also perhaps to avoid a connection being made with him and Belov at the FSS. Using the resources of the FSS, or FFS, I've forgotten already, Goran prevents all inquiries into Belov's fate and the attempted autopsy, so all those times we attempted to identify technically both of us, we were stopped by our own meddling pre-brain damage. This is where it gets fuzzy for me. But so something happened during this process. Maybe he was slightly frozen or put under to appear dead. Some kind of procedure is done that results in Goran losing his memory, which he only partially regains after being whacked in the head. I theorize that the moment he is brought to the prison, he's sort of being manipulated by other mobster characters that maybe know who he is and are just corralling him in the right direction to ultimately unfreeze their boss, whereupon it would simply be too golden an opportunity not to replace him in the chair, because now he can continue doing whatever it was he got up to from the shadows, while the authorities think he's in deep freeze. That's just what the donkey wheel of my thoughts could produce. The most elusive thread in this ending that honestly is causing most of the damage to my comprehension of it is the flashback moment that implies that Goran killed Whip for some slight against Belov and blacked it out maybe. I feel like most would see that he's capable of killing someone and then forgetting it and wager it wouldn't be that big a leap to assume that Goran is the executioner. We were all thinking it the whole playthrough, and I'm open to anything that confirms the thing I was already thinking, so sure, why not? Goran is the executioner. Only how was he killing people when he was confined in a cell? How is it that we meet a guy that says he's literally seen the executioner? And upon telling this to the executioner, standing right in front of him, yeah, he kind of looked like, oh, wait a minute. I know you from somewhere. Were you ever killing a bunch of guys and then made direct eye contact with a guy in cargo shorts? Through some process not told to us, an organized gang of killers is ruled out, even though it sure would make more sense. So from that point forward, I assumed this was not a possibility. But seeing as the Agent 47 type that dismantled that lock is later shown to be working for Belov, a man who has the ability to clone himself, who could, from the looks of it, make a bunch of the same guy to make it nigh impossible to stop what is technically one guy, it makes you question if that absurd body count, to borrow a turn of phrase, is counting or not counting gang violence. But then again, why would I really want to know? I'm the kind of sick fuck that appreciates an unanswered question, a mystery left unsolved. Triggering all kinds of psychological damage, it challenges you, gets the creative gearworks of your mind shuddering to life. Life doesn't always provide you with an answer, so why should fiction have some obligation to give you one? Also, the idea of line-by-line machine translating an AI-generated visual novel prequel to a Russian point-and-click game sounds like the sort of thing that I do not want to do.
By the 1970s, the Constitution of Soviet Republic determined that dictatorship of proletariat had been accomplished, so what need be done now is distill communism into aerosol form, load it into giant tube and launch it at our capitalist enemies. This is what I propose, but of course, nobody listens.
There is an effectively creepy and oppressive atmosphere that sometimes winds its way into Midnight Nowhere, like a crime scene that you just can't leave, a Chernobyl-like disaster that's moving from building to building. There is also an occasional lucidity, a moment or two, where the protagonist simply says a straightforward thought, and the logic of it all feels recognizable, which makes the abundance of rancid one-liners, confounding Slav jank bits that seem pulled from another game entirely feel all the more paradoxical, as though you cast Larry Laffer in The Machinist. At one point, whoever you are references something being mauled by a blue crocodile.
How many of our boys have fallen in this battle? Some were chewed up by blue crocodiles. Some were mauled by flying dogs.
So I Google Blue Crocodile Russia and learn that there is a Soviet-era stop-motion character named Jenna the Crocodile. Is that what he's talking about? I clicked on a door. There are no other shreds of context to work with. Every line like this is matched with one I kind of get.
It's as easy as pissing on two fingers.
I can't stress enough how relentlessly off-putting this guy is. And there are several things he says that are repulsive, but I also don't know why he's saying them. I have no read of who this guy is because he's always on. It's hard not to think of him as a comedian in the grips of some kind of manic episode where he's stuck in his stage persona. Just say something normal. Fuck!
I'm risking landing in the shit feet first. But if you're gonna drink champagne, you gotta take risks.
Just want you to stop saying odd shit.
And yet, it pains me to admit that there is something fascinating about Midnight Nowhere. Not Black Oasis, but Midnight Nowhere. It's something I haven't really experienced in another game. To borrow a Red Letter Media-ism, it was new to the palette, and sometimes that can elevate something well past where it would ordinarily rank. It's already doing something novel by being a dark comedy point-and-click adventure game, but it's also fighting through localization and cultural differences to bullseye that weird, singular, edgy voice, and the result is transformative. I think something else limped out of the transporter on the way to English-speaking regions. I don't think it would surprise you to say that there is a big communication problem in Midnight Nowhere. Not only because of localization, but because nearly every line of dialogue is at least said in the cadence of a joke. So even when I can't make heads or tails of the joke, I know that at the very least you're not taking the situation seriously, and whatever you had to say is simply not helpful, not pushing me in the right direction.
There's some dude in the bag.
But the main character is our main source of information and feedback. It's not like there's text that appears when you mouse over interactables or items or really anything from the UI. Everything we know about the game is coming from a guy that I'm pretty sure I've seen writing a message in Sharpie to his gang stalker on the dumpster outside of my apartment window. He'll comment on numerous things in the environment that are irrelevant design choices, which ordinarily I would welcome, but that irreverence is also used on things that are important. There is an old school sensibility with the game's take on pointing and clicking in that there are a selection of cursors to activate that perform different things like look, take, talk, and use. And as is often the case with games that use these cursors, discerning which cursor to use in any given moment can often lead to frustration, and eventually just trying all of them on anything that can be clicked on. The comedy bits that I can recognize are the ones that are intentionally goofing around the genre conventions. On several occasions, you'll find like an article of clothing or a bag, and you can continue to click on the object as Larry pulls out unhelpful item after unhelpful item and makes a little quip about them for what seems like too long, and then on the second to last click he'll find an item that we can actually pick up. Well, maybe that's why I don't care for him. He's a prop comic. He's a stool fucker. This sort of thing I can appreciate, and even with the bizarre dialogue, it's a pretty universal joke. Oddly enough, what wound up pissing me off the most about the game is that, you know, like a lot of adventure games, when the game has to tell you you're off base trying something, think of something else, the developers have this impulse to put down the player for even attempting what I'll admit is a strange combination of items sometimes, sure.
I don't need this cellophane shit even for free.
But have adventure games been known to have strict real-world logic, completely grounded puzzles? I don't know about that.
First of all, it's a worthless piece of shit. And secondly, I've been scared of needles since I was a kid.
Like, what is this? Not only does he insult the thing I tried to pick up, but he's weaponizing some irrelevant childhood trauma to make me feel bad about it. It's not that deep. I just thought maybe you could, you know, throw it like a dart through some bars to hit a button or something dumb. Look, I'm sorry. I should have asked. I will take this as a learning experience. So sometimes Larry would say shitty things like that when you're just trying something out. But sometimes he'd be weirdly well-spoken and not trying to be funny while doing it, as though the only time he acts fucking normal is when I'm fucking up.
Don't put her in here. Don't put her in here. Why bandage this? Why bandage this? Why bandage?
Yeah, why anything? I think Midnight Nowhere presents a paradoxical dynamic with its puzzles by understanding how to use a puzzle comedically, or sometimes just commenting on the tropes in this quippy, self-aware way, like, here I go, picking up another goddamn key for another fuck-shitting locked door, as you do in these types of games. But I feel like that would be received better if the foundation of its whole design was really competent and airtight, and it wasn't falling into literally every pitfall one could with an adventure game.
I don't see any locks at all. I don't think we're gonna have to use the axe. Aha!
Sure, it's silly how often these games are centered around finding keys for doors, but then you made a conscious decision not only to include 2 locked door funhouses, but contradicted the game's plot in order to make that happen. Yeah, a hospital was evacuated as a serial killer cut a bloody path through everyone inside, but each victim collectively agreed to lock, barricade, or bar every door behind them. What I can appreciate about Midnight Nowhere, in a non-backhanded way I promise, is that it feels like something that could have only been made because there was a joy to creating it. There is an indie spirit to it, a haha, what if we made the entire second act take place in a single jail cell that you have to methodically tear apart, dismantling the plumbing, looking for nudie cards with riddles about movies scribbled on them, type of thing. The longest continuous puzzle sequence in the game does nothing to advance the story beyond proving to some guy that you're worth bringing along in a jailbreak attempt, which immediately fails at step 1, which is pretty funny. Step 1, get the guard to open the door. Fail! It was clearly made by a small group that had fallen into a comfortable rhythm, making a certain type of game, attempting to further distill one creator's singular vision into something fun, even if it was slightly out of their wheelhouse. Even though the game takes some annoying or boring stabs at puzzles, I love how seated they are in plot. There is an abundance of reason and explanation for things having to play out the way they do, and they don't really ever meet up with the main plot all that much, but there's still a lot of thought put into why it makes sense that this is the solution. There is this sequence where you're led to another cell, and then the guard that locks you in is immediately killed, and you have to come up with some means of busting out. And so you start looking around at what you can work with, what you can fish off the guard, coming up with an odd assortment of things that don't really go together to make anything. Least of all, whatever the fuck he meant by this.
So, what's gonna come of this? Harpoon for a prison shit catcher?
But also, there is this manifesto scrawled on the wall of your cell from a terrorist that was previously waiting in here before being sent off to cryosleep. He explains that he's got a grudge against the cops of this town for arresting and killing all his buddies, so he's invented a volatile explosive substance called Lucifer's blood, which he has smuggled into the prison inside his stomach, and he had a plan to blow the whole building up, which he's helpfully depicted in doodle form. However, when he was put into this cell, he realized he had no means of detonating the substance after he had retrieved it, so he left this explanation and hid the stuff in the air vent above. All this work, all this housing built so you could shoot the lock, but by the time you do this relatively uneventful task to little fanfare, I feel like I'm coming out the other end of a journey all its own. As is often the case with adventure games of this era, I adore the look of it. There's something about the way these pre-rendered environments use these clean, smooth, and primitive in a sense assets to try and assemble a scene that looks cluttered, ransacked, or lived in. It's just one of my favorite things to look at, next to the 9th episode of Season 3 of Buffy the Vampire Slayer. There are frames of Midnight Nowhere that I think are masterful works of art, and many of them are just transitory liminal spaces. I keep thinking about this reception desk that you walk around to enter an office, and there's nothing to pick up or interact with or examine, really. But I was so charmed by the level of detail and the atmospheric lighting, the half-open blinds in disarray, letting stripes of moonlight through. Even just the placement and condition of items suggests a scuffle that you can easily track and recreate in your head. And look, you could say it's nostalgia-based, but I say nostalgia-based. Actually, I won't say that. And I never did. Are we clear? I don't know if it's just because places like this were common in adventure games, or if it's a particular kink of mine, but two places I love to see in these graphic stylings are office workspaces and morgues. And we get plenty of both in this game. The sight of knocked over generic cola cans, emptied and discarded cheese-based snack packaging, oh, it's like music to my eyes. And the presence of a copyrighted IP, in this case Mr. Potato Head, is just a cherry on top, an ingredient distinct to the Slavic adventure game. A lovable and respectable disregard for copyright. Of course, not every area in the game is as considerately designed, and there are some copy and pasted elements for sure. Something I found interesting yet slightly discordant with the look of the rest of the game was the abundance of posters and photos and magazines featuring a sort of mixed media digital art, where I can only guess they've taken stock photos or public domain stuff and manipulated them in some kind of editing software to look goofy and cartoonish, giving people big noses and elf ears and so forth, and given the devs' interest in gross out imagery and porn, The result can often look not dissimilar to the ads that would show up in 90s era gaming magazines, just cranked a notch or two further. Looking at them unlocked this deep dark buried memory from the year 1998. I was at a friend's house and he had this sick setup where his parents had put a PC in this desk that like fit in the recesses of a closet in his room. I feel like you're picturing something like they just shoved a thing in a half-open closet, but it's like it was built in there. I can still see it perfectly in my mind and recall the envy. It was on that PC that I would first experience what would become one of my favorite games, Sanitarium, or a demo of it rather. But he also had this kids software that probably came bundled with the PC called Kai's Power Goo.
Goo is fun. Goo's easy.
Upsetting name aside, it was like a simple image warping CD-ROM that looks like the exact sort of thing that birthed this fucked up shit. The music in this game vacillates between genuinely creepy and dreary or lonely sounding, with a few zany exceptions. For the most part, there's a lot of droning synthesizers and eerie piano. This room with a comically hazardous ventilation fan along a catwalk has a track that's dominated by what sounds like a bandsaw and guttural whispering, and that speaks intimately to my interests. Overall, the horror of the game is represented well in the music, but it does have to share time with some more lighthearted adventure game tunes like the acoustic guitar-driven track that plays in the prison cell, which is catchy and a bit of an earworm, but it's also like a minute long and loops very ungracefully. Should you choose to boot up the game yourself, you may find that by default, the music is set to be what I can only describe as so fucking loud that it drowns out the character's speech and my own thoughts. The composers are listed as the very not Russian sounding Tom Diskin and Dennis Fett, though it looks like as recent as 2024, the soundtrack produced for this game was, unless this is fake, officially released under the name Electra 1006. Who has apparently been making music since around the time Midnight Nowhere was released, so shout out if that is real, but for whatever reason, just the fact that someone remembered this game within the last 5 years has me intrigued but skeptical. Midnight Nowhere presents the strangest relationship between voice actor and script that I've ever come across, because the voice acting is actually solid for what the game is, but they are performing a very flawed script with garbled sentences that frequently lose their meaning. I just realized because of the way I sit in this chair, I inadvertently recorded my own restless leg syndrome. Alongside this, the subtitles are struggling even harder to make sense of things. At one point, I picked up a key off a dead nurse, and the main character says, "I bet half the hospital once envied this little key. There must have been quite a lot fewer, can't have been nearly as many blind people here, though." It's kind of wild revisiting this game after having just revisited Next Life, because it would be easy to dismiss Midnight Nowhere as suffering the same sort of bungled localization, but I don't think that's the case. Nobody says anything in Next Life that I couldn't untangle in my head. While the dialogue could be awkward, it was also coming from a thick accent that added a weird believability to it, as though these characters were truly just ESL and doing their best. In Midnight Nowhere, this guy is so well spoken. He sounds like he should be narrating a Jackbox minigame. He sounds like Cookie Journeyman. I don't know if that joke works, but I gave you all the clues, Mr. Police. Which makes it even stranger. I also have no idea who provides his voice, as it's not anywhere in the credits. Not at the end of the game, nor in the manual, but they sure got a lot of use out of him. Various other characters are not so subtly just that guy putting on a voice. To the point where I was genuinely confused when you first start talking to Whip.
If I attack you, you fucking prick, you'll be pissing blood until you retire.
You introduced the concept of cloning and it throws everything into question. Maybe Whip is a copy of another Whip. With so little to go on, it's all valid. And you introduced the concept of brain damage and it actually better explains most things in this game. I've been holding on to my feelings about and memories of Midnight Nowhere for so long that I feel like I'll be lost at the end of this video. To vent these thoughts now as what may as well be an entirely different human being. It's like some vestigial organ is being purged from my system, and there's a melancholy to that. That's part of me, isn't it? That's like my little baby. That's my son. I feel like its plot is a mess that doesn't entirely come together ever. Like you can feel that large sections of it were hacked out, leaving only its setting and atmosphere, which are admittedly pretty interesting, and fighting for their life to maintain your attention. It's got enough going on to get your brain's creativity center working overtime. If anything, to just work out a better story using these puzzle pieces. I think there is a lot to praise this game for, a few things to criticize, and some things to gawk at. For a comedy game, I think the amount of times I muttered, "What the fuck?" outnumbered the times I laughed at something that was meant to be laughed at. I often look back on the sheer stink of gaming culture in the mid-aughts, and truthfully it's hard not to do so with fondness because it was just as dumb as today's gaming culture, only without, delusions of grandeur. It didn't have a plan. But if you conjure in your mind all the worst impulses of a game made by a bunch of Russian boys in the year 2005, the racism, the sexism, the ableism, some other isms I can't recall right now, they are all here. It's all real. And it's awful for that. But it's also so dumb in the way it chooses to present these things that I'm almost convinced it was trying to say something with them. I try to see the best in people. It's one of my flaws. Strangely, the things I found the most effectively funny were tied to gameplay and put in as a reaction to adventure game tropes. There is something sort of novel about pointing out a common flaw or divisive choice without being obvious and nudging you the whole time about it. But it does this from the safety of a glass house, committing just about every sin of unintuitive adventure game design I can think of, down to pixel hunting, which again is like, I guess that's funny. I like that. Visually, there is so much of what I love about these types of games on display. Endlessly charming environments, and I think I like them so much that it's a shame there isn't a better story or more likable characters populating them. All that said, I'm glad I live in the same world as Midnight Nowhere. The experience of happening upon this weird little volume of a game in the wild and walking into it blind, then walking out of it without a chance in hell of ever meeting someone who had ever even heard of it, must be comparable to the spiritual affirmation that comes with having a prayer answered or seeing the Mothman. It harkens back to an old magic where you could come across some strange media and had no network or database to explain its context, to know how it got there and why nobody was talking about it. It contributed to this realm of games that seemed like an industry back alley, the type of game that was strung up with others in the lining of an off-putting man's trench coat. Even now, I stare at its box and wonder both affectionately and derisively, why did they bother? Why bother exporting this cryptid of a game? But ultimately, I'm honored to have glimpsed it lurking in the bushes. That is the end of the video. Thank you for watching the video in its entirety. If you enjoyed it, consider engaging with it in some way. If you really enjoyed it, consider joining my Patreon, where for as little as $1 American, you can gain access to several hours of additional content, with several more in the works once I GTFO. That will likely be the next piece of content I release, just for the special little critters. And then after that, I am legally obligated to make a video about Parasite Eve 2, which was the winner of the Discord poll. Other things in the works, but hey, you'll figure it out once they get here. Hey, forget about it. Get out of here. Get out of here. Yeah, thanks Thanks again. And an extra special thanks to Ailing Uncle, 2Password for Kids, a large biotic gerbil. Again, Dean says, Mercy dotes and dozy dotes and little amsy divey. Alexander Smith, Andre Perkins, a normal scarecrow, a parts 89, audio video, Baird Brown, Beef Lightning, Ben Oliver, Bionicle Enjoyer, Bobble the Gobble, Caroline Greer, Cheeseburger for Grimbo, Cheedoodle, Christian Zombie Vampire, Cormac, D-Sky, Dan Halloran, Daniel Lucas, Dante de Glanville, Daphne Pittendry, Dark Raptor 86, Dead Tired Dad, Deluminati, Der Capitan, the real Michael King, Dirt Person, Dirty Nays is part of a balanced breakfast dude, Dr. Beard, Dongs.exe, Edgy, El Jaguar, Feathered Octopus, Fubi, the Kamikaze Watermelon, Frodo Ballbag,
Garbage Day!
George Kindred, Naigo, Grime Bear, Grok, Hyperion, I am Rich Evans's Shrill Witch Cackle. I'm starting to feel like most of my parasocial relationships are one-sided. It Dig, Ludex Alexander, James Nicholson, Jan Hamlin, The Bucket Witch, Jason Corbin, Jay Alameen, John Dreffs, Jojo Cat, John Boring, Jordan Clark, Juho Karenko, Just a Ghost, Justin Harper, Carrot, King Rathew, Conrad Johnson, Labor Delenda Est. Mangoes are objectively the best fruit. McSwell, Michael Schmidt, Morgan Dorian Trius, Nick Bellinger, Nico Puzzle Rat, Pazuzu, Puke Skywalker, formerly 410,757,864,530, Gay Cops, Sable Gray, Psycho Gekido, Samuel Vanderplatz, Short King, Scandy Trash, some kind of phonetic spelling. Stinklich found the flask of Tefnut. Sweet Pete! Back in the seat, baby! That Iru guy loves you. That uninformed guy. The bloke. Two-Stan. Valerie. Venin333. Worm. Zach Bishop. Zeus Quinn. After much consideration and some credit card fraud, I've realized Piss Missile is a bit crass, come cannons where it's at, yo. Delilah Lynn Donk. Eto. Avanerve. Evoked Doom. Fix My Brain. Giraffa. Gumpy Wumpy the Dwarven Fingerer. Hales. I continue to support Grim while the world crumbles around me. I'd take a Faustian bargain to give Grim a smooch. Jean-Baptiste Emmanuel Zorg. Jeremy Silver. J. Hamilton TX. Johnny Sachs. June Choi. Jaya Temkoa. The coin landed on its edge. Catherine Graven, Cobelt, Michael Cantor, Mr. Alpacleton, Oh Hi Grim, Pants O'Hara, Red, Skevin from Heaven, Smokey Jefferson, Stumpovich, Swood Operator, Sharepants, The Super Pickle, Tuggy, What's in a Name, A Hanging Chad, Ale Humano, Aronai Saez, Binary Vision, Brady the Sanity Tax Collector, Chimichanga Jones, Kodamite, Daniel Moen Larson, Dano the Mano, David Offord, DeForzy, Dicey, Dreadlord Alex, Fiona Summers, Gareth Farrow, Grounded Valkyrie, Happy Icebergs, have a wonderful day, Hide the Cryptids, James Snipes, Jared Carlson, Jason Chandler, Jetsun Jampel, Nawang Lapsang Yeshe Tenzin Gatso, J-Man DX, Qualls, Liam O, Lugubrious Moron, Mad Monty 98, Mod Sword, Name Requires DLC, Neb, Ophelia Fishwife, Orphan Smith, Parapug Fan Club Member, P Dizzle, Persian Air, Pickblick, Rayro Plizplop, Resident Aikman, Robert Brandon, Roscoe Bosco, Rowdy Roddy Peeper, Ruibisomem, Scrumptious Scummy, Slideshow Dreams, Sugarboo, Take My Money and I'll come up with something funny later, Technica, Test Case, The Angry Pebble, Tebow, Tuski, Vilmar Valthorson, Violet Vivienne Corbel Record, 1/4 Dead, 12 trans rats in a trench coat, 77 Elvis the King, a big gay rat, a squatting necromancer hanging at the local crypt, a shireling, Alan Wake Me Up Inside, Alistair Stewart, Alistair Grout, All Beer, No Breaks, Allie probably needs a nap, Andrew Light, Andrew Lebrano, Andy P, Anesthesia Catheter Gurney, Anti, Arden Hughes, Astro Shepherd, Auspicious Whiskers Loves His Boyfriend, Balton, Bames Jolie, Bogler, Ben and Kara Dowling, Ben Mahler, Bibby F and Bloxburg, Big Honk, Big Wee Dog, Bishy 93, Biddles 99999999999999999, Bivda, Bjorn, The Split Tongue Swede, Black Robed Mage, Bob Dole, Bogdan Atanasoye, Bog Witch Bunny, Bong Iver, Bostradamus, Brandon Winkleman, Breeze McMothman, Brick, Brown Pants Gaming, Bumblerick, Burps Wimbledon, Butter My Biscuits and Bingle 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 Bingle. Caleb Zane Kelly, Cameron Doherty, Cameron Spoon, Cassandra M, Case, Chase, Cheese Witch, Chernobyl Kinsman, Chicago Chaz, Chicago's famous Rat Hole, Chris Miner, Christopher Lawrence, Clast, Clayton Joe Freund, Cliff Racers, Colby, Cole Bramlett, Colm Casserly, Colonel Custard, Concatenation, Count Zero Interrupt, Captain Jax, Crispy J, Cryptid Spouse, Pumpkin Spice, Cyborg Number Blue, Cherakshima, Stripshakshemp, Stavio, Chutsie, Giantstistina, Ivispurbe, Jans Mots Muts Jumuts. Da Cannon, Dak Daniels, Daphne, Dark Saramar, Darth Couch, David Frumke, Dazed Clockwork, Deadbleat, Denny J.A., Destriga, Devin McCullough, Devonna Upperock, Devoured by Incandescence, Disco Pickle, Do the Manta Ray, Dr. Futurity, Dog Vomit Slime Mold, Dom, yes, that Dom. Wait, no, not that one, the other Dom. Doug Z Mag, Dylan Berry, Dismitriou, Eat Play Hate, Eben Hollub, Eben Sullivan, Eels, EO, Eric Clapton, Espresso Commander, Eudiptes, Everyday, Once a Day, Give Yourself a Putty, Valentia, Fangro, Fart in my belly button while you tickle my toes. Fart Mother, Fatboy Tubbs, Farrakhan, 15 moderately sized high-definition rats listening to Breakcore. Filth Pig, Flop Sweat, Forlorn Hope, Fox the Fuchs, FPFX, Frank Orifice, Fried Potato, Frogski, Frolics with Bunnies, Funny Little Guy, Fuzzy Tingle Times, Gamblor, Game is Good, Ging Gingam, Gingu, Gangle, Zubi, Zangu, Zagi, Zagingu, Gloomerous, Gloria Gordon, Goaty Galaxy, Goblin Princette, Gravy is a Piss Boy, Grenth, Grimby, I'm pregnant, it's your... Grim Creeper, Gurneel, Gwen Yeager, Haley Bobella, Harvey Bodega. Have a look outside, it's beautiful. Hey, would you blow me? Heck, it's Noah. Hello, putty seller. I'm gooning into battle, and I want only your strongest putty. Henry, Hentai McToonboob, Hex of Hearts, Hibernia Scholar, High Food Court, High-Res Titan, Hime Rowan, Hitoshi-san, Horror Show 93, Hurlk, Rothdell, Hug, Hugh O'Brien, Hunterlit, Hyborian Age Space Marine, Hyde King, I fart on my hands. I found your dream. I, Grimbeard, make people happy and I should feel good about that. Ideas Thiet, Ilya Idampkin, INTJ loves her INTP, Irish Wristwatch, Irish Wristwatch, Irish Wristwatch, Irradiated Otter, Jacob O'Callahan, Jacob Simon, Jacob, Hazel, Kurt, Ian, wake up! Jake Raynor, Jamal Cooks, Jeff Ladd, Jeremy Langell, Jesse James, Jim Flandango, Jizzes the Second Coming, Edie Karpiak, Jogoth Ur, Joey Jojo Jr. Shabadoo, John Final Fantasy XIV, John Tomorrow, Joseph Cap, Jewel of Housecat, just a normal name this time, just give me a name, Justin Darnell, Katakin, Kai Palladini, Captain Ketchup, Karagera, Karen Rosnow, Kieran Walker, Kelly O'Neill, Kevin Handley, Key Lime Pie, Kid Charlemagne, the FCC can't catch me, Kind Raccoon, Kingyo Ningyo, Cowboat, Kozoku, Chris Odie, Crusteasy, Kyle Ragsdale, League of Struggle, Lee, Leland Miliokus, Leopold Gloom, Legendary Dragon, Life Himself, Lone Gunman, Luke James, Luke Reynolds, Lurking Presence, Lydecker, MA2, Magic Meows, Mainly May, Mandalore Gaming, Mango Roxas, Mark, Marquois, Jason Trapp, Maxine Zeds, Medic 273, Micah J. Best, Michael Anderson, Michael Yates, Michal Baran, Miles Phillips, Mind Golbin, D's, Cosplayer at SawCon, Nuts, Mr. Blank Canvas, Monster Train, Mortified Victim, Mortis on Fire, Mother Destruction, Mr. Mighty McMonkey. My name is Martin, and I cherish my wife every day. Mystical Lint, No Stars. Nathan, Neckot the Brave, Nex42, Nick Timmons, 9-inch Nikos, Noel C137, Noise Tank 1, NSW3, Nullrom, Oliver Frost, Opichi Kostra, Harapugs #1 fan, Parpito Truck Car Van So Fast, Pathetically Hopeful, Paul Fierce, Petrashek, Philip Coffee, Picture, Present President, Pleasant, Peasant, Pheasant Plucker, Princess Tiny Feet's Corn Niblets, Prophet, RIP Windows Phone, Radia, Ratin X, Ratula Jones, pronounced like a rat Dracula, Red Chowder, Replicant, Richter Strauss, Ridley, Robo Narples, Ronak the Axe, Rose, Rotanis Kong, Ruby Marufo, Rusty Spork, Ruth Strange, Saluki, Sam F, Sathington, Savvy Fave, Scofflol, Sebastian, Saluneto, Shadanon, Shade, Shrimp Lord, Shrimpy Nobashi, Sybil Arnett, Silatixo, Slugs and Cats, Snitzboy, Solar, Somebody Has Got to Feed That Skinny Puppy, Somewhat Spooky, Spooky Schaefer, Spoopy Ghost, Startide, Stay Soft, Suzuya Rose, Slamka Bents, Taro Lati, Team R, T Stony, Teeny Dragador. Thank you for making great things. That one Skaven under your bed. Yes, yes! The Clay Pigeon, the lovely Dr. Dick Punch, the pigeon hiding in your walls, the Plath, the saxophone from Lost Highway, the Sea Peoples, the hairiest hair, the Ninja Warrior, the Rude Gentleman, the Sky Doctor, the Supervisor, Thick 4 Mom, Thingamajiggly, Tired, Toaster Child, Tom, Tori, Trenton Wilkins, Trevelyan, Tyler Collins, Umberkin, Unidentified Hooded Figure, Unknown Function, Vince Van Diesel, Vincent Cronin, Violet, Voden Odwendauer, Wahey Shet, Watching Grim staves off existential dread of life. Where am I? Help. Whole Cloud, Ya Boy Mike, Yarr! Zalia Tridentarius, Zanga PF, Zen, Zombo Rombo, Zoop De Whoop, Zuli, the Little Blue Kobold, and Whenever for being a patron, and the rest. Well, I hope you like that one. It's a little one. It's a short one this time. But we got the patron one, which is going to be long. I can only assume Parasite Eve 2 is going to be long. So rest assured, I'm going to be in the mine. I hope you're happy with that. What else? What's in the gaming news? I recently played that game Mouse PI for Hire. And you know what? Beautiful art style. Can't say enough good things about the art style. I love that. I love rubber hose shit. So on that front, you know, they nailed that. But it also kind of just doesn't aspire to be much else than like a really competent shooter with all the mechanics you've come to expect from one. Disappointingly so. Anything else in the news? Console price hike coming. I've been debating getting a Switch 2, but it's like that Switch 1 gathered dust real fast after the pandemic, so something's telling me that the only way you're gonna sell me on a Switch 2 is if it comes bundled with a pandemic. Anyway, I gotta get back to work. I've been trying to finish up some music. Here's some of that, how that's going. See you later. Thanks again.